You're not going against your intuition. You're going against the pattern.
Mhm.
Those are hugely different things.
Yeah.
And I tell myself and I tell my clients all the time, just because you've done it this way for so many years does not make it right. It
Mhm.
just makes it patterned.
Welcome to The Shift, where we search for ways to do better by thinking better.
Whether you're going through a major life change, looking to deepen your understanding of yourself, or hoping to improve your relationships with others, The Shift is here for you.
We're your hosts, Isla and Yashar, an endlessly curious sister and brother team.
As certified brain-based executive coaches with backgrounds in medicine and management, we combine the neurosciences, performance psychology, strategic planning methodology, and mindfulness techniques to empower your transformation from the inside out.
Join us in conversation as we explore better ways to show up for ourselves and each other. Welcome back to The Shift, friends. Today's topic is how to change. Every time we have a new client, every time we work with a new team, the consistent question is, how do we change? Most of us have an idea of what we want. Most of us know something is not working. And we're all deeply eager to understand how we can change for the better, but we don't know where to start. And I think most of the episodes that you've listened to so far, and if you've worked with us, you know we don't believe in hacks. We're not going to give you a checklist of things to do to make sure you did it right. But when we look at change, there are three main categories we can break it down into that hopefully will help guide you through this process of allowing you to optimize and shift your behavior to better serve you, your work, your family, your community, and create the kind of world you want to live in. Before I start with number one, I want to pass the mic to Yashar and ask you about this question and how it comes up for you in session with our clients.
I find a lot of times people often know what they want. And so the question automatically turns into how. So how do I get what I want? And it's such an honest question. It's almost an obvious question. But the problem is there are many more questions that have to be asked prior to asking how I do something. And that's what this conversation today on this episode is about, is to understand the importance of asking questions prior to asking the how. And so when we know somewhat of a formula of how to work through this problem set, it's much easier to answer the question how to change than if we say, I know what I want, so now tell me how to change. So that's number one. Number two, again, with a lot of our work, and anyone who's listened to our workers or has worked with us would know that we don't often give you answers. We ask just better questions. And you are able to come up with your own answers through your own wisdom. And that often is much more impactful for you to start answering the question of how do I change? So that's what's most exciting and intriguing for me, and hopefully for whoever's listening to this conversation, for how to change.
Exactly. I love how you said that before the how, there's other questions. And so you're right. So before we ask how to change, our first question for you is going to be, why do you want to change? What is the actual problem here? And it goes beyond what someone has told you, what you think is expected of you. And it really needs to be down to the basic question of, do you want to change? And if you do, why is that? A great example is smoking. If your enjoyment of smoking is greater than your why, it is greater than you seeing it as a problem, then you'll never quit smoking, right? And you can see that in many instances of the things we want to shift within our lifestyles, within how we act and behave. The why needs to be stronger than whatever this behavior is giving you. Even if it might be a seeming problem, if the attachment to it is greater and somehow more enjoyable for you than it being a problem, the shift will almost be impossible to make. So the first question you have to ask is, so why do you want to change? What is the problem that is inciting you to want to create a shift?
Yeah, it's about examining your motivations, right? It's about understanding the underlying reasons why you want to make the shift, why you want to make this change. And I think a good way of looking at this is like when you ask yourself, why do I want to change? You start by personally with the relationship you have with yourself. If I change, how would this change my relationship with myself? And then applying that motivation to your interpersonal relationships. If I make these changes, internally, I will feel this way. And then externally, my relationships will shift how, right? This helps bring about more motivation, not only just for you and yourself, but also how that ripples onto others in your community, in your family, or at work. And I think the part where I find most people can get tripped up with this first part of asking why even change is we have to start also identifying triggers that cause the problem in the first place and then why we want to change. And when we understand what prompts this behavior and why we want to change that behavior, sometimes if we're not careful, we can start entering a cycle of blame. But only if that person didn't do this, then I wouldn't feel this way. Or if only if my boss didn't treat me this way, then I wouldn't have to like do all this work to like be better. Or only if my child didn't trigger me this way, I would, and on we go. And so identifying triggers is important for why we want to change, but only if we do it in a way where we bring it back to ourselves and our motivation for how we want to grow and how we want to be better. So instead of saying, when she acts that way, it makes me feel angry or makes me feel scared or whatever the emotion is you can start identifying the trigger and moving it more into your motivating change by saying, when she behaves that way, whatever that certain way is, I notice I begin to feel angry, scared, ashamed. And so the question is, so why do you want to feel different? Why do you want to do the work? So in that scenario, in that moment, you're motivated to go through the challenge because there will be challenge, of course, with any sort of change. And the higher the degree of challenge, the more important examining motivations, examining what the actual problem is, examining what the actual triggers are that bring you into this challenge are going to be.
Exactly. So again, the first question is, why do you want to change? Get crystal clear on your motivation here. Get crystal clear on the wins you expect to find at the other end of this journey. Why is it worth the risk? Why is it worth the challenge? Why are you willing to put your resources in this direction to create the shift you're looking for? Before you can go anywhere, before you figure out how you're going to change, you need to know why you're doing it in the first place. Then we can move on to number 2. This one is about getting curious. What has created the atmosphere that has created a resistance in the past? What is getting in the way of your change? You've probably come across this challenge before. You've probably tried to change it many times. What happens every time you try to create this shift? Again, if we work with our example of smoking, most people have tried to quit a number of times, not always successfully. So the question number 2 is, what is getting in the way of your change? When you are trying to create that change, where do you feel it? What is it telling you? Why have you been doing things the way you've been doing things? Where is the resistance? Is it physiological? Is it emotional? I really want to emphasize when we're coming into number 2, we are going to get curious here so we understand the roots of what is causing resistance to the change so we can see it head on. But we're not going to get stuck here. We're going to get curious so we can gather information to help fuel our change when we start making aligned choices.
One of the best ways I've found to do that work and to not get stuck in the mud and to be able to move through resistance is to include some form of mindfulness practice or somatic work. I will put a little caveat here and say, also, I have found with a lot of people and also myself that physical movement in itself can be part of this, but I don't think it could be the complete package. I think you can do the work if you dedicate yourself to mindfulness practices and somatic work alone. I think physical activity is beautiful and necessary and helpful in so many ways. But I have found that physical activity by itself, without the mindfulness component or the somatic work, falls short. So I do want to put that out there as somebody who uses a lot of physical activity for my own therapy. I have seen better results by adding and maintaining mindfulness somatic work on top of the physical activity. And so, again, I'm going to put another plug, which can never grow old, but often we roll our eyes at this point when mindfulness comes up. And the plug I specifically want to put into place for this conversation is not a certain practice where you are trying to change your mind, which is really not what mindfulness is even about, but I know a lot of us go there. The whole point of this practice at this point, to melt some of that resistance away, is to stay present with yourself in the thoughts and be the observer of the thoughts versus trying to change or manipulate the thoughts. And a simple practice you can try yourself is focus on your breath, obviously in a comfortable, quiet place. And when a thought comes up, you can just label it thinking and then try to come back into your breath. And it'll come up again. It'll probably come up many, many more times in that, 5 to 10, 15-minute session that you're going to start with. And you just say thinking and bring it back to your breath. This simple practice of starting to loosen the grip that thoughts have on you, and then the narration that continues when these thoughts come up, is the practice that I find most useful. You are inevitably also starting to practice some form of compassion towards yourself, where you don't have to continuously run and chase these thoughts and these feelings. And you allow yourself just to be present and practice the idea of being present and labeling, thinking, and coming back to your breath. What this does off the mat, so to speak, what this does when you're not in meditation, is it teaches you to be a little bit more patient when there are going to inevitably be setbacks. You're practicing the idea of, oops, there it is. I'm aware, I'm mindful, and I don't need to go wrestle it right away. I can let it breathe a little bit. I can let myself take a step away from whatever the situation or the thought or the challenge may be. And you start to enter a place of compassion that you're human, and therefore you're going to have human experiences, which includes kind of feeling like things aren't working out all the time for you. And you learn to treat yourself with patience, kindness, and grace. You learn to not face the challenge with pure resistance and fight and muscle, and be a little bit more deliberate in how you stay present when these things come up. And so answering the question, what's getting in the way of your change, is often an emotional pattern and a thought pattern that you've stayed kind of consistent with. You haven't allowed yourself any other space or time to think differently. So once you start to identify what's getting in the way with this thought pattern, then we create the space. And once we create the space, then we can enter into the third step to do something about it.
I think a great way to think of it is that you've been loyal to this behavior. And that's why we started with your why. So when we get here and we understand that you have loyalty to this behavior, it's going to become the time where we shift your loyalty to your why. But we can't do that without understanding why you wanted to do this change in the first place, because the loyalty you have here to this behavior, however harmful actually, is going to be stronger because it has more muscle memory. So whatever you're going to do next is going to be uncomfortable, which leads us to our third point, which is, what is the behavior you want to replace it with? So as we lean in from the second one, as I just talked about, you having loyalty to this behavior pattern, you go back to your why to understand, why do I want to change it then? And then you come to number 3 with, what do I want to replace it with? And as soon as you do that, you need to know this is a new relationship. You are building a new relationship with weak to no muscles here, because the stronger muscles have been your old behaviors and patterns that you are deeply loyal to. And even though now you are motivated to change them to something new, something that serves you better, it's a new relationship. So the neural pathways you have here, again, might be none or very weak. Most likely, most of this behavior, if not all of it, will be within your stretch zone. And so it will require you to actually do things that are the complete opposite of what you've done. So intuitively, our bodies are going to have large risk alarms like, error, error. We shouldn't be doing this. But if you've done it in these steps, you've built the inventory of this conversation to understand your why. You got curious of why there was resistance in the first place. So when you are now in your stretch zone and you do feel like you're going against your intuition, you know that you're not. You're simply in a stretch zone that doesn't have the muscle memory and inventory yet. And so part of this conversation and this relationship you're building is going to be brand new. So the question we have here is, what do you want to replace your behavior with? What is the new ritual? What is the new routine? What is the new behavior? What is the new pattern you are trying to build?
So before I jump into number 3, what was interesting about what I heard you share right now, Ayla, is that I think intuitively most people can understand the why question. And then maybe perhaps intuitively even understand, okay, so what do I replace it with? What do I do opposite to the thing that I want to change? Okay, so again, with smoking, why do I want to stop smoking? Because I'll be more healthy. So what's the opposite? Don't smoke. It's so simple and unhelpful because it doesn't have the nuance and the stickiness that we always talk about that we need to do the work. Again, another example, if the smoking one doesn't resonate for you, why do I not want to fight with my coworkers? Because we'll have a better cohesive environment, we'll get more work done. So what's the opposite? Okay, don't fight with them. Again, so basic, so obvious, and so unhelpful. And so that middle question, where we talked about mindfulness, where we talked about having the awareness, or where we talked about understanding what gets in your way, is the bridge from your motivations of why to the behaviors of change. And that's what actually keeps this whole thing together. It's the glue that holds it all together. Most people succeed with number 1, the why. They get excited about that stuff, right? They want to be a stronger character. They want to have better relationships. They want to change their health. They want to. But then it falls apart because they don't do the middle part of what's getting in the way. What's the obstacle that prevents you from the thing that you want? And that's such an important point that I want to double back on based on what you just shared, Ayla, because it's the actual thing that'll help us come back into, okay, so now it's time for behavior change. So what do you want to replace it with? Because you're going to hit resistance, and you have to have a tool that allows you, as you said, well, to not get tricked into, I'm going against my intuition. Mm-hmm. You're not going against your intuition. You're going against the pattern. Mm-hmm. Those are hugely different things. And I tell myself and I tell my clients all the time, just because you've done it this way for so many years does not make it right. It just makes it patterned.
Yeah. Can you say that one again? I feel like that one needs a
just because just because you've done something a certain way for so long, for so many years, doesn't make it right. It just makes it patterned.
It also doesn't make it who you are.
Correct.
It's not your identity.
Though it very much can feel like it is.
Absolutely. Yeah. But we go back to that loyalty point. Like, we believe that this is us in all the good ways and especially in all the bad ways. And it's not. It's not what defines you.
So to add a point to the third section of what's the behavior you want to replace it with, I would say that most often we're not specific enough when it comes to this behavior change. We don't set a clear enough goal and a manageable enough goal so that this new muscle can get a little bit of a workout in, but it is not overwhelmed by the challenge. And sometimes I appreciate that it's easier said than done. You know, life is life, and life happens, and you can't manage everything and control all the variables. However, we want to give our brains and ourselves a focal point so that when this comes up, we can take that step into the new version of ourselves without trying to climb Everest, if you will, the first day that we, enter the trek. And so an example I will give here is, again, for myself, is when I speak to my son and maybe a challenging situation comes up, I find myself very easily going into lecture mode. I want to teach him and I want to show him the rights and the wrongs and the differences and all of that. And that may have a place And that might even be enjoyed by my son at some point. But what I've noticed is it's my go-to first, and it definitely isn't something he resonates with or helps him in any way. And I've caught him say things to me like, I need you to hear my pain first, or you haven't understood what's really bothering me first. And it really caught my attention that he said this more than once. And I had a battle within me. Part of me was defensive and saying, well, I am teaching you right and wrong, and I'm showing you the way, and da 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 da. And the other part of me is like, oh my gosh, this young boy is just like, hey, you haven't seen me yet. And so my little step, which can sometimes be easier than other times, is when a problem or a challenge comes up, can I stop myself from lecturing first? Can I more actively look for and listen to his pain and reflect it back to him in a way where he feels seen and heard? And then use that as a gateway to get into the lesson plan, if you will. Use that as a gateway to get into the understanding so that we can both grow through whatever the challenge may be. And so another example could be if someone's triggering you in certain ways and you want to be more patient, just saying, I want to be more patient with this triggering event might not be as impactful or useful for you as it may sound in a neutral and calm state. Because when we're triggered, we need a little bit more. And so what you could offer yourself is, I want to take 3 deep breaths before responding to this individual. And so the moment of just, I'm going to literally ask myself to take 3 deep breaths, and then I'm going to write back, whether it's in instant messaging or live in person, you're just going to put a pause before you respond. So that's a major piece to this third section, where you want to change your behavior, you want to replace it, be specific with what you want to do, and stay focused on that first and grow from there.
That's a great point about baby steps. We just talked about how all of this behavior is new and intimidating, and you're uncertain, and you might be overwhelmed. We've said this probably in many of our episodes, but you can go slow. You can take the first right step, whatever that is. Create new muscle memory, create new inventory. We cannot take for granted that those micro steps are the ones that support the macro changes we are looking for.
Absolutely. And a way to help those micro steps build up on one another to create macro changes is seeking support, whether that's informal support, communicating your intentions with friends and family that you trust, sharing your goals with trusted people so that they can help you stay accountable to yourself, really, and meet the goals you set for yourself. And of course, there's professional guidance, whether that's therapy or coaching, so that you can really start to understand the deeper underlying issues. And more than just understand them, start to break them down and consider strategies. Often professional help is what's needed so that better strategies, more useful strategies, and more individualized strategies are created for you. And so that you can start processing what's going on. And again, adding up these wins you never thought was possible for you, or that you needed the support of someone to do that work.
And this is essentially the process in which we lead you when we're working with you. When you come to us at first, we ask you why you want to change. You do the leadership code, which by the way is free for anyone listening. Link is below. You're going to do the leadership code. You're going to get clear on your values, clear on your goals, understanding of your why. So whatever change we want to create, we create shifts from that base, that foundation. Second, you go through a series of mental, emotional, strength building coaching sessions with Yashar to understand what is getting in the way of your change, to start building these mindfulness practice that we talk about, for you to get to the roots of these loyal relationships you have to your old patterns and behaviors, so that we can respectfully learn how to optimize the shift. And third, you start working with me and we decide what we're going to replace it with. We dream. We look at the ideal space in which you want to grow. And now that you've built those muscles with Yashar, you come to me and we take steps towards them. We get clear on your goals, I spot you in your stretch zone the whole time, and you stay accountable to the shifts you want to create. So when you come to us and you ask us, how do I change? That's how we do it. We get curious about your why. We get to know what was creating the atmosphere to produce these behaviors. Then we give you the tools to create the shifts, to create the change you want. Thank you for listening, friends. What shifted for you during this episode? We'd love to hear your insights. Write us with any questions, commentary, or episode ideas at theshift@mindshiftleadership.com. If you enjoyed this podcast, we would deeply appreciate a like and subscribe.
The Shift is brought to you by MINDSHIFT Leadership, a heart-centered, evidence-based, mindset-powered leadership company, empowering you with the training to prioritize mental health, inclusion, and performance optimization.